Hello, this is Professor JPS, and this is a streamlined lecture for Communication Arts 257, American Film Heritage, the course that deals with films of the 1960s/1970s. We're getting near to the end of the semester, and this is Monday evening, the 27th of April, for what would have been tomorrow's class, April 28th, from 1 to 4:15. What I want to discuss tonight is a little bit left over from last week's film and unit, the film Chinatown. And I'm going to go over some aspects of that particular film. But for the most part, the general issues that we discussed last week with Chinatown are what are most important. And I think that you'll find the program note reading, the thing that I had shown you last week, was pretty valuable for the Chinatown lesson. This, okay? Those list of 4 things and the big paragraph up here. If for some reason you have misplaced that or you do not have that, if there's a way in which you can take a photograph of that if you wish, but I will return to some of these aspects, but I just wanted to discuss that film a little bit in terms of what I think is most valuable about it. Now, I understand that maybe some of you did not get a chance to see the film yet. If you haven't, I really strongly encourage you to make sure you try to get a chance to see the film in some capacity. It's a terrific movie in a lot of ways. Also understand this is a course that deals with historical aspects of cinema. So this course is made this film is made in 1974. Even though, like many of the films that I've shown in this particular class, it takes place in a different time period, the 1930s, but is influenced by the then contemporary 1960s/1970s sensibilities of showing anti-authority and anti-establishment, and getting a sense that some of these films were relatively critical of America and American capitalism, yet entertaining as well, similar to The Godfather. Chinatown is very, very powerful in how it takes one particular genre and then updates it and then makes it feel meaningful for its time period. Okay, I want to go over just some things about the particular film in case you didn't see the film. I will be giving spoiler alerts, but I have to in order to make sure that you understand what's happening. It's a fairly complicated film, and I didn't want you necessarily to worry too much about the plot, but I will reveal a little bit what happens in the film. Okay. Basically, the movie is a story about how this private investigator cannot figure out why the person who was the water commissioner of Los Angeles was murdered. The water commissioner of Los Angeles, who was married to the Faye Dunaway character. It looks like it's an accident. It looks like he's drowned, but the Jack Nicholson character figures out that he's actually been murdered. Faye Dunaway's father, Noah Cross, used to be partners with the guy who was murdered. And Faye Dunaway's father is a completely corrupted man. He's an evil man. And what he wants is he wants to own the water department, and he wants to own how much he wants to be able to charge people for water. And he's trying to build a dam, and the water commissioner will not build it again because another dam had failed. So there's this large scheme that takes place where Noah Cross buys up a lot of property of people who were old and infirm at the senile place, or old and senile at the old folks' home, and he buys up all their land once they start dying off, so he can have a place for all the water to be coming in from different dams and reservoirs, so he can have access to that. And then he pulls the strings with local politicians to make sure that the valley next to Los Angeles becomes incorporated into Los Angeles. And what he does is he knows the identity of that young woman because he's responsible for that identity of the young woman. And he knows that Faye Dunaway will hide that secret at any cost. So when the Jack Nicholson character starts to investigate what he thinks is a man cheating on his wife, it is not that at all. It is a decent and honorable man, knowing that his wife had been at least sexually assaulted, or at least in a sexually inappropriate relationship with her own father. And that girl is Faye Dunaway's, both her daughter and the result of her own father's sexual assaults on her as a young woman. So when Jack Nicholson is trying to find out the truth about the identity of this young woman, and he actually starts to strike her across the face, and Faye Dunaway says, "She's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my daughter and my sister, do you understand now?" And up until that point of the film, there's no way in which anyone could anticipate that that's why Faye Dunaway seemed like she was lying all the time, because she felt a great deal of shame and yet responsibility for that young woman. And her father is a horrible, horrible man who not only raped his own daughter, but used the offspring as a way in which he could frame his partner and then ultimately have him murdered. And Jack Nicholson uncovers all of this. And we think the good guys are going to win. And we think Faye Dunaway is going to be saved. And we think the young girl who's the daughter of Faye Dunaway is going to be saved. And we think that love and truth will triumph. And it doesn't. So that's what gives this film such an immediate, in 1974, an immediate sense of power and sadness, and a kind of drawing back the curtain and looking into the real world of cynical, awful, horrible people who have that power, and that power corrupts absolutely. So usually movies in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, a little bit in the 60s, when you had a detective who was smart and could go with rich people or poor people or black people or white people or people who were involved in all kinds of nefarious activities, and that person always figured out the story and right was done. The bad guys went to jail or died, and the good guys usually won. What gives this film what you would call a redefinition of this genre is that all of those things come to pass and they lose. Corruption wins. Noah Cross doesn't care who knows it. He's bought the police off. He's bought the law off. Faye Dunaway gets accidentally shot in the face and dies, gets shot in the eye and dies. And Nicholson, who has done everything possible to find out exactly what's happened, to uncover the truth, and a deeply ugly, awful, just gut-wrenching truth is revealed to be, too bad, power wins. And when he says at the end, he kind of gives up and says as little as possible. And then his partner says, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown." And ostensibly what that means is you can't fight it. You can't fight the overwhelming power of corruption, the easy way in which people just give up, the easy way in which money rules everything. And it was such a beautiful yet sad and cynical message. And it may or might not meant much to you for those of you who have seen it. Maybe it was just too laborious. Maybe it was a little too long. But you have to understand, this film was really, really well received in 1974 because it really tapped into that sense, just like The Godfather, of the Watergate scandal era, of the failure of the Vietnam War in the United States, of some of the cynicism that was taking over after the peace and love hippy-dippy 60s. Now was the cleanup time after the party. Now was the difficulties of actually making civil rights work. Now was the actual difficulty of an oil embargo when We don't have as much money as we used to. The difficulty of crime in New York City, like in Taxi Driver. The difficulty of the President of the United States revealing to be a crook out in the public. What was so intriguing about Chinatown are not only things we discussed last week, but the idea that this particular genre was redefined, or sort of had the cliches dusted away, right? I talked about the idea of the femme fatale last week, or femme fatale. The Faye Dunaway character, when people started to watch this movie in the first hour, they just assumed that she was going to somehow or another use her sexual prowess to get Nicholson to do what she wants. Now, they do have an affair. Well, it's still a Hollywood movie, right? They have to have some sort of sexual connection, right? But she's not a femme fatale. She's a victim. But we don't know she's a victim until the last 10 minutes of the movie. And then she becomes the ultimate victim. So there's just enough there that's recognizable from older films, from that film noir genre, that have elements that are like that. It's a dark film. It's dark in theme, but it's not dark in the way it looks. In fact, the way it looks is very dry. The film has this beautiful but sort of thirst-starved sense to it. It's almost dried out. Los Angeles doesn't look pretty. It looks like it's arid, like it's a desert most of the time in the film. It's hot. It's not, engaging, or there's no glamour to it, right? The movie was really, really good in terms of its connection to demonstrating an anti-capitalist position. That even with the law doesn't matter. Faye Dunaway says, with a gun in her hand, he owns the police, which, was relatively new for films in the 60s and 70s. Not completely new. There's always been some kind of corruption, but audiences really connected to it because the President of the United States just that year resigned because he was going to be impeached for crimes. Okay? So just a couple of things that you may remember from the reading. The film noir genre is redefined, or it's redone. It takes some of the elements of filmmaking and makes them, takes the genre with the elements of filmmaking, makes it a little different, okay? Los Angeles is not shown to be glamorous or beautiful, but arid and dry, to reflect not only the plot point of a drought, but also the metaphor of a moral wasteland. The femme fatale theme, film noirs always have a female character who utilizes her sexuality to trap a man to get him to do what he wants. The Dunaway character is not that kind of female character. In fact, it seems like she might be, but turns out she isn't. Water as a symbol. Many shots of water, both in drinking glasses, ponds, pools, oceans, steam from a car as a lubrication, washing windows, dripping from faucets, even in floods. They're all subtly remind the viewer that the film's point of power and corruption has to do with an elemental aspect of everyday life, water. Even the power for the metaphorically named Noah cross, right? Noah, the flood from the Judeo-Christian Bible, and cross. If you cross somebody, you're being difficult for them. The music in this movie is beautiful, and it's sad and it's somber, similar to Taxi Driver. Quite somber and moody, both calling back older musical scores of film noir, but revising them for then present tone in Hollywood. It's very brooding and melancholy, kind of sad. Okay, the rest of the basic reading, it's okay. It's mainly plot development, as I mentioned before. But what turns this genre on its head is its ability to give you just enough that's familiar from old film noir, but then turn that conclusion on its head to reflect the times of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, rather than the times of the 30s. To make the character heroic, but ultimately fail, right? It's a much more realistic depiction, and it's very, very beautifully told, and to some degree realistic and sad, okay? Chinatown. If you haven't seen it yet, I know you have to gather this material for our final and all that kind of stuff, but I really strongly encourage you to see it and see it again, because sometimes it takes a couple of viewings to get a sense of it. And Faye Dunaway is just so terrific in it. So terrific. One of many films that I have are, for this particular class. Okay. Now, in terms of what would have been today's film or tomorrow's film, the film Network. Network is, to some degree, a little bit of a satire. Network is a little bit of a satire in terms of how it is that it treats its subject matter. Network is a film made in 1976 about a fictional national television broadcast network called the UBS. It's supposed to be just like ABC, CBS, and NBC. Okay. Now, I can't even believe this movie's 45 years old, 44 years old. But anyway, this movie is really quite a good prediction as to what cable television news and to some degree network television news would become. Now, there's just a little bit of a historical analysis for you guys to get a sense of how television news changed and how it was much different before cable television and certainly much different than before digital journalism or digital media or social media. Okay? So it may seem a little archaic to you, but it shouldn't be that archaic. I mean, the basic news system on television is essentially the same. It's just that this film was made before cable television. So just bear with me a little bit with some of the history, okay? Television news in the 1950s and even into the early 1960s was relatively small scale in American life. And in fact, nightly national television news in the 50s was only 15 minutes long. And for the most part, television news with the three basic networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, in our area, it's Channel 2, Channel 7, and Channel 4. Basically, the news was not really expected to gain profits, to make money. The networks produced television programming to make money. Westerns, sitcoms, cop shows, what have you, right? And the news was sort of seen as a public service. It came on at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, then maybe again at 10 and 11 o'clock in the evening. And, it cost them some money to pay anchors and to pay reporters and to pay camera people. But for the most part, each of the three major networks, and again, there were three major networks really until the mid-1980s, they all understood that each of the other networks weren't really making a tremendous amount of profit, but it was not seen as the profit center, right? You were trying to get audiences and therefore advertisers with your programming. That was the general idea, right? So a show came on at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, cop show, sitcom, whatever, hospital drama, whatever it was, right? That's where networks concentrated their money in terms of trying to get audiences, get commercial revenue. The news, yeah, they still had commercials on the news, but they weren't really looking to make money because they knew that the other networks weren't making that much money either, because it was the news. Like you can't program the news. The news is reported on. Okay, so that basic idea was standard for the most part in the 50s and even into the 60s. However, something horrible happens on November 22nd, 1963. John Kennedy, the president, is assassinated that day. Now, contrary to what you may think, he was not killed on television. The film that you've may have seen of Kennedy being shot was filmed by a man who just happened to be there filming the president in a motorcade. And then that film was later bought out by first Life magazine, and then it's become part of history. But that didn't happen on TV. When Kennedy was killed, however, The three major television networks more or less just stopped all programming for those 3 or 4 days between Kennedy being killed, his body being brought back to Washington, then his accused killer actually being killed on television. Lee Harvey Oswald is killed in the Dallas police station by the man who runs a strip club down the street. How he gets into the Dallas police station is an ever-ending question for all humanity, to end up killing the president's supposed killer. But at any rate, then that's covered, and then Kennedy's funeral is covered, and his laying in state at the Capitol Rotunda is covered. And guess what? That horrible news generates a tremendous audience for news. So little light bulbs went off over the head of executives at ABC, NBC, and CBS. And they said, this is a terrible tragedy, and we'll cover everything about the Kennedy assassination and his funeral. Television can help the nation heal. But gee whiz, our ratings are pretty good. Food for thought. Then what happens is the 60s happen, right? You have the moon landing, generating a tremendous audience, newsworthy. You have children who become teenagers, who then become people marching against the Vietnam War in great numbers. That's covered heavily on television news. And then you have a very vital utilization of television news with the Civil Rights Movement. For the first time, audiences all across America not only hear about Black people being pushed around by white Southerners, or being spit upon, or having the cops hose them down, they see it on television, right? Then you have also feminist movement, and a little later on a gay rights movement. In other words, there's lots of stuff that's happening in the 1960s that's on television. And I think between civil rights and the other key one is the coverage every night of the ongoing mess in Vietnam. Vietnam is the first television war. Prior to that, there was no television coverage. There were no televisions. I mean, maybe a little bit in Korea, but that was it. Television really starts to bring people away from newspapers in terms of getting their news. And television executives are starting to understand that news can be used not just to inform, but to generate large audiences, because people are watching TV all the time with the news. So right there in the early 70s, the idea of television news becoming more profitable becomes kind of an idea that this movie network tries to take on. And it takes on the actual dangers of what can happen when you take the very powerful forces of television and make the news something that's entertaining and something that's trying to attract audiences rather than trying to inform people about what's happening. It's sort of like the difference between, selling people cotton candy and selling people a decent balanced meal so they'll actually live a decent, healthy life. And once television news raced to get audiences to then charge more for commercials, to then try to make a profit, what you ultimately may have happen is a tremendous dumbing down of the general public. And what this film does 44 years ago is predict that. It predicts what happens when a television network allows the news to become sensationalized or bastardized in the name of profits. When it becomes a show rather than something that's supposed to be informative. Okay? That's the basic layout of this particular film made in 1976. Okay? The film is directed by a guy called Sidney Lumet, Lumet, who was a great movie maker. He started off in early television, live television, in the late 40s and early 50s. And he made some wonderful films over the years. He learned first on live television, a little bit of theater too, but also live television. He was an actor when he was a child, and he was an endlessly interesting man. He made a terrific movie called Serpico in 1973 with Al Pacino. He made also a wonderful movie with Al Pacino 2 years later called Dog Day Afternoon, which is great. He made a film called 12 Angry Men about a decade earlier than that. He's really an outstanding movie maker. And he directs this film very well. And it's written by a fellow called Paddy Chayefsky, who was a really brilliant, funny, cynical writer of many films and plays. Okay? And it stars some older actors. It stars William Holden, who plays the sort of main character, and this other guy called Peter Finch, an Australian actor. And of course, it stars Faye Dunaway, my favorite 60s and 70s actress, who's really great in the movie. In fact, she won an Academy Award. Not that that means anything, but she finally won an Academy Award for this particular film. And she's really just ruthless in the movie. And it has some stuff that's akin to this late 60s and early 70s social movements and Black Power movements. And there's something similar to the Patty Hearst kidnapping that happens in this particular film. And in some ways, it's almost like a satire, but it's played completely straight. Okay? And it's really a chilling film, but it's also a very good bellwether predictor as to what would ultimately happen with news, particularly cable news, and what would happen to the American public in terms of their ability to absorb news. And I think there's something to be said about that some 30-some years later when you have a reality television star elected to the highest office in the land, I think reflects a certain degree of, let's just say, an ill-informed voter. This movie's made 40 years ago, and it's making those predictions about the dumbing down of a great democracy, when news, which is something that we all should pay attention to, is becoming nothing more than an entertainment vehicle for ratings' sake. A couple of things. I have program notes that you should have. Program notes that are there discussing some of the things I just went over. I'll go over them again in a minute, but if you want to take like a quick picture of that or something in case you don't have your notes nearby. Okay. And then the reading itself is a pretty basic reading from McGill's Survey Cinema. And it more or less gives a kind of overview of the film. Just a couple of things we can discuss here. TV news first was only 15 minutes long. JFK assassination may move to at least a half an hour. TV news was not how most Americans got their news until the 70s and early 80s. Newspapers were. All through the 60s, before the 60s, people were informed by newspapers there. And then as the 60s went on and people start turning on their television, newspaper readership was going down and television viewership was going up. It's a gradual decrease of newspaper readership, but television took over newspapers by the early 80s. And now the internet has taken over both in some ways. Although I still think television is kind of like the cement wall that makes narratives go, and then the digital media follows. TV news was not expected to make money for the three networks until they started to compete with cable news outlets in the 70s and early 80s. Ratings suddenly became more important to TV news producers, whereas before they were not important. Delivering trustworthy news, at least somewhat trustworthy news anyway, was. Since the time of this film, TV news has become the chief source for most Americans in its weakest form of journalism. This film tries to predict what happens to the news when ratings are more important than news. Okay. A couple other things in terms of the elements of filmmaking in this film that I want you to watch for if you haven't seen the film. I want you to watch for how the film looks cinematographically, what the cinematic tone is. That is to say, what does the lighting look like, right? Is it warm? Is it not warm? Does it have a certain color palette? What does it resemble? What do you think it resembles, sort of artistically? Just a thought, okay? Just a thought. The other thing is, I want you to watch for length of shot. That is to say, how long shots last. Okay. Also, the text, how people speak. Get a sense of how it is that the characters interact with one another. Okay. The sense of their textual communication with one another. That is to say, literally the language they're utilizing. And also how the film the editing is nothing too major, but it also goes hand in hand with the length of shot, how long the shots go for, okay? Also try to look for the sense of the pacing of the film, okay? All those pacing, length of shot, they kind of go hand in glove. So just get a sense of that. But I want you to test yourself in terms of the lighting. Remember, this is a film about television. I guess what I'm asking you, do you think it looks more like a film, or do you think it looks more like television? And not, HD television that you're used to, but television of a different sort, basic television. Okay, get a sense of that. Some of the era's political stuff may go over your head. Don't worry about that. Just try to get a sense of it. It's somewhat 60-ish. But the 60s have been over, so it's a sort of leftover feeling of some radical groups that you may or may not be aware of that are mentioned in the film with some consistency. Just a couple of other things in terms of where we are. There's still a handful of you that have not sent back to me test 2. I know some people are working on it. I know some people have had some internet issues, and some people have had some family issues. It's fine, but do try to get them back to me as soon as you can. You know who you are. It's not too bad, but there's still a few of you out there. And understand that there's only a couple weeks left in the semester. Tomorrow is April 28th, network, and then next week is the last film of the year, a film called Breaking Away, which is a really nice film. It's a little less cynical than the films I've been showing these past weeks. It has a certain sweetness to it and uplift. It's about 4 teenagers who are 19 years old and they're trying to figure out what they're doing with their life. And they're working class teenagers who live in a college town. So they're sort of half understand the college kids and half don't understand college life. And they're very working class in a time when America was kind of regressing economically. Okay. And then in 2 weeks' time is the final exam period. The final exam, I have here written May 14th. That's a mistake. It should say May 12th. Sorry about that. I couldn't add from May 5th to May 12th. And then what I'll do is I'll give you a handful of days to finish the final exam. The final grades are absolutely have to be put in by noon on the 20th of May. So your final exam will be due before that because I need time to grade. I have 5 classes. I can't get all that stuff done on May 20th. So if I give it to you on May 12th, which would be 2 weeks from tonight, I'd probably give you like 4 or 5 days to get it back by, say, the 17th, 16th or 17th, something like that. Okay? Just 4 questions. Just 4 questions. And the last question's kind of a basic cumulative question, not that big of a deal. Because there's only 3 films left. There's Chinatown, Network, and Breaking Away. And then I'll give you like a question about the whole class that you can, answer as best you can. Okay? The screening sheets, I haven't gotten a lot of those, but I guess kind of similar to what happens sometimes in the regular class. Send them to me. They all count. Do the best you can. So do that, okay? The other thing is, I know there's a lot going on, and I pray to God that you're all okay, you and your family and your friends. There have been some students who've had COVID. Most of them that I've had any dealings with have gotten over it, but I know some family members have, it's been tough. And if you haven't, thank God you haven't, or whatever you believe in, but also like understand that even though you may be kind of screwed up and thrown off and kind of angry, man, thank God you're not sick. Okay, that's I've been reminding myself all the time of that, because I really miss the classroom. I really miss you guys. I really miss being in my office. I really miss actually going to a Starbucks. I really miss, sports. I really miss all that stuff. But, so far I've been healthy. My wife has been healthy. My family's been healthy. My daughter's been healthy. So when you're feeling that sense of, when's this going to end, just try to remember that you're okay. I mean, as long as you're okay, that's important. And you have to work hard to finish the semester. Don't blow it now. We're all in it together. Just stay in touch with me. Please stay in touch with me. Now, we have to try to pre-reg for the fall semester. Okay. I don't know what's going to be happening, but my hope, my dear hope, is that we'll all be back in the classroom by the fall. I just don't know for sure, but if you're able to pre-register for classes for the fall semester, please do. If you need help, I am here. I will do the best I can to figure out what courses you can have, what courses you can take, what courses you need. Okay? I can't yell at you in the classroom anymore because you're not there. We're not there. I can only trust that you're hearing me blab on and on in these silly videos. I'm trying to be as much myself as I know how to be without a blackboard behind me. Okay? So please look at your NCC degree evaluations to see what courses you may need, particularly if you're a comm arts major. Okay? Now, for the fall, there's Intro to Mass Comm, which most of you I'm sure had. On Tuesdays, there's something called American Film, Comm 157. It's not American Film Heritage. That's this course. Comm 157 is all independent cinema. American Film, all independent cinema. Tuesdays, 1 to 4:15. Same kind of deal as this. Thursdays, I'm teaching Communication Arts 256, a 200 level class. Okay? That's focus on the director, famous filmmakers over the years. Okay? One is on Tuesday, one is on Thursday. 2 separate classes. Comm 157, Comm 257. Fall, Tuesday, Thursday, 1 to 4:15, room 229. Okay? So, if you're interested in those, please take them. Please sign up for them. Okay? Also, there's 3 journalism courses being taught in the fall. One is journalism regular, journalism 121. One is media writing, Comm 215, and one is digital journalism, Comm 221, I think. That one's once a week as well, okay? So just keep that in mind. Everybody in comm arts, that is, needs one 200 level writing class, okay? So please keep that in mind as you move forward. Plus the film and video classes are they're being offered as well, always, okay? I don't know if you've had one, or you definitely need one if you're a comm arts major, at least one of those classes. But there's, comm arts 1, 2, 3, 4. Do the best you can. Or if you need, your maths, your sciences, your IDSs, whatever it is that you need, I'd be happy to talk with you. I'd maybe try to Zoom with you or WebEx with you, or even speak on the phone. I've spoken to some students on the phone about this. I don't care. I'll give you my number. I don't care. Okay? But God knows what the summer and fall are going to be like. But the best way we can try to manage is to try to be as normal as possible. And if you have the ability to do any pre-registration, now is really those times, because it's either going to get canceled, or there's going to be many kids coming back whose parents aren't going to pay for UConn or WestConn or Wesleyan or whatever, and they're going to flood, maybe flood NCC. I don't know. I really don't know. But please don't ignore pre-reg. Okay. Give me questions. Let me know. But just please be specific. And when you email me, please just tell me what class you're in. Okay? I keep getting emails from students who I know a little bit, and I'm not sure which class they're in. I teach 5 classes. I have over 100 students. So it's hard for me just say, this is Jane Smith from COM 257 Tuesdays, or Joe Smith, COM 257 Tuesdays, or whatever class you have me in, okay? I waste so much time trying to find out who sent me an email so I can figure out what they're talking about. Okay, so finals are coming. I'm sure you have final projects for some of your film classes, TV production classes, or whatever, your screenwriting class, whatever. It's just, you have to be disciplined, and this end of the semester is upon us. May starts this week, okay? So the workload in this class is not that tremendous. So make sure you're just paying attention, okay? I hope you guys are well. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. Be diligent, man. Do not think this is over. It is not over. Make sure you're wearing your mask. Make sure you're wearing gloves if you have them. If you're able to get, there looks like there's a little bit more hand sanitizer, although it seems like a generic brand out there, but at least there's a little bit more hand sanitizer, man. And teenage kids, man, do not kid yourself. Like, do not get together with all your buddies and have house parties or something. That is really bad. There's all kinds of stories in Chicago, hundreds and hundreds of teenagers drinking and hanging out with each other. You can't do that. You can't do that for yourselves. You can't do it for the rest of the community, man. It's horrible. That's how it keeps spreading. So unprecedented times, but do not be stupid, okay? Suffer the consequences of just humanity and stay at home as best you can, okay? Oh, and vote come November. Vote for whomever you think will best represent you and your family and your constituencies. But at any rate, have a good evening. And I'm going to send an email right now. And any questions, please email me, okay? Please. And look at your NCC emails. NCC emails. And I'm not on Blackboard, so don't look at Blackboard. I'm going to have to be on Blackboard by the summer, but do not look at Blackboard. Thank you. Good evening.